Hi, I'm Martin McGrath from Financial Edge Group, and I want to talk to you about a thing called a non-concessional contribution. A lot of words and jumble there, but it's something I want to talk to you about how and when you may be eligible to use this in your life. So a non-concessional contribution is basically just voluntarily moving some money into super. There's a different type of contribution called a concessional contribution, and it's important to go and check out that video first or as part of this to make sure you understand the different types. Today I'm just going to focus on the non-concessional side. The way a non-concessional contribution works is when you put that money into super, there's not a tax event. You don't save any tax, you don't get to claim anything back on a tax return, nor when you put it in, do you have to pay tax inside of the super fund. Other types of contributions attract a tax rate of 15%. Non-concessional contributions aren't taxed when they go into super. So it's important to know that. So if I'm not saving any tax on day one, why would I do one? How do they come into play? And what it's really about is that it's helping people boost their super. You might realize in your late 50s or 60s or 70s, I don't have enough into super, I want to put more in. This is a great way to put more money in. But also what you're doing is you're moving and you're adjusting the future tax rate that you'll pay on this money. Because if you leave that in your personal name and you earn some interest or some income or some dividends, you'll keep paying personal tax on this. If you move it into super, it starts to come into the super tax environment, which potentially if you're still working in what's called accumulation phase, that might be 15% tax, which still might be lower than your personal tax rate. And importantly, when you retire and you move to pension phase, it's likely going to be taxed at zero, which is a pretty nice tax rate. So it's important to understand when and how to use these non-concessionals. The limits potentially are fairly generous. At the moment, they're $120,000 per person per financial year. So that's a fair amount of money we can move in. And often it might be we see people have some savings that are built up, we move some money of that in. Or it might be that we've sold investment property and we've got a lot of money left over after the debt's been paid off. It might be an inheritance or downsizing home. There's various ways that people come into this money. It's then about where's the best place for it for the rest of our lives. And non-concessional is typically part of those discussions. These limits are use it or lose it. If you don't put it in 1 year, you can't go back and catch it up in future years. So it's important to plan appropriately for these non-concessional contributions. But there is a certain thing with non-concessionals called a bring forward. And what that means is you can bring forward future years limits. And you can bring forward 3 years into one, so this year and 2 more. So what that might look like is that you can put 120,000 in, next year's 120, the year after 120. So that's 360,000. You can put all that in today. What it means is you can't put any more in for 3 years' time because you've used the next 2 years. But that might be a better way to go and put a big chunk in today rather than putting some in now, waiting a year, putting in more, waiting a year, putting in more. Everyone's situation is different. It's important to understand the rules. That's where these non-concessionals come into play, particularly these bring forwards. And importantly, that's per person. So if we're part of a couple, potentially that's 720,000 combined that we can get into super. And again, we don't save any tax on that today, but if that substantial amount of money, or even let's call it $100,000, was earning you about 5% a year, whether that's an interest or rent on a property or dividends, in your personal name, you might be at the 30% tax bracket or higher. So therefore, on that $5,000 a year, you're paying tax on that. We move that into a super fund, we might be able to reduce it from 30 down to 15% in tax. And if retirement's not that far away, potentially down to zero. So it's a good way to get that tax rate down as low as possible. So it's important to plan for this. Once it goes in, it might be hard to get it back out. So make sure you're putting in the right order at the right stage of life. Non-concessional contributions are a large part of the strategies we work with clients on. Whether it applies to your situation or how it applies to your situation really depends. Important to have a chat with a financial advisor to see how that suits.